Hello and welcome to another video that's a follow-up video on last Wednesday's video where I showed you how to connect pedals to your amps. And some of you really liked those kind of beginner tutorials, so I thought, well, why not do another beginner tutorial, and maybe some of you who are intermediate will also learn some things or so. So today's video, how to connect an amp for playing, recording, whatsoever. So before we start, there's actually one thing you have to consider. You either connect a cabinet to your amp, then you can play live or in the room, or you connect your amp in some way to your computer, and then you obviously need some headphones or some computer speakers to hear something. So one of the most common cases is for you to have a tube amp with a standby switch. And you can basically say that the power switch activates the preamp and the standby switch activates the power amp. But when I just plug on the standby, the power amp won't work. You always have to activate power first. This means you switch on the power and then you wait a bit because the power amp section of your tube amp has to heat up a bit. So for instance, turn on the power amp and then tune your guitar or so. And then you turn on the standby switch and then the amp should work. If you turn on first the standby switch and then you turn on the power switch, you most probably destroy some of your tubes, and in the worst case scenario, you even destroy or harm your amp. So I highly suggest not doing it this way. For a tube amp to properly work, it has to be connected to a cabinet and the resistance has to match. So for instance, if you have a 16 ohm cap, you have to connect it to the 16 ohm speaker jack. And if you have an 8 ohm jack, you have to connect it to this 8 ohm jack. Some jacks are switchable, so you have a little switch that can change the resistance, and other amps have just a couple of different jacks with different resistances. When the amp is powered and the standby switch is on, you mustn't connect or disconnect caps to the amp because then you will fry the amp. As far as cables go, there are dedicated speaker cables, and I highly suggest using speaker cables because the wire of the speaker cables is much thicker than on regular instrument cables, and because the signal is so hot that's coming out of the amp, you need those thicker wires. Technically, it also works with instrument cables. However, there's no guarantee that you don't fry anything. So don't do this. Spend some money in a good quality speaker cable. If you don't have a speaker cabinet, you can also use a load box. A load box is basically a speaker without a speaker. It has the same resistance as a guitar cabinet, just doesn't have a speaker, so it's perfect for quiet recordings. This one is from Two Notes Audio. It's an 8 ohm, so you can only use the 8 ohm output, and it claims that it has an input of 100 watt, but you can safely connect amps with higher output. You just have to be careful that you don't crank them. So you can easily connect a 150 amp, for example, just have a moderate volume and everything will be fine. Be careful, some of those load boxes need actually some power, as this one needs power, for instance, from a power supply or phantom power. Otherwise they won't work and you will fry your amp. Another way that works, but I typically am quite honestly too afraid to use, is that you only activate the power, so no standby switch, and you use the FX send. And because the preamp section is already working, so you should get a signal out of here that you can connect to your computer. This works, but to be honest, the sound will not be as good as when you use a capped amp or a speaker or a load box, because you don't have here the power amp coloration and the controls that only affect the power amp, for instance, presence and resonance. Some amps, especially modern amps, have a built-in attenuator, so you can safely use them without connecting any load box or cap to them, but this depends on the actual amp model. Some tube amps don't have a standby switch, so they just have a power switch. That's typically the case with lower wattages, and this means that you can't use just the FX send. You mandatorily have to use a load box or a cabinet. When you want to connect your amp to your computer, or when you want to record what you're actually playing, you have to decide if you use a cap, and if you use a cabinet, you need some kind of microphone to, well, capture the cabinet sound of your amplifier, and you have to connect your microphone to the interface. And if you don't use a cap, you most probably need some kind of frequency correction, because the signal the amp gives out is a full range frequency. It goes from 20 Hz to 20k Hz. And an original guitar cabinet doesn't have this full range. It has, actually not sure, it has a low cut somewhere about 100 or so, or 80, and it has a high cut at around 9k or so. What this means, if you connect your cap via the FX send, or you have a load box and there is basically no frequency correction, it will really sound awful. It will sound really harsh and really shrill. So either you have some kind of frequency compensated output, some amps have it, some attenuators or some load boxes like the Torpedo Captor has it as well. And if your amp has a frequency corrected line out or headphone out or whatsoever, you're good to go if you like the sound. However, if you don't have it, you need impulse responses, and you need another plugin in your DAW. This can be a free plugin like STL Tone's Nadir. It's an impulse response loader that I actually use quite heavily. It comes with free IRs. You can also buy third-party IRs like the Bogren IRs, which I really like, but there are also some other free ones out there. Or you can choose whatever IR loader you want to buy, or maybe there are also some others that are free. If you don't own a tube amp, you most probably own a solid state amp. This means there are no tubes in the power amp, but maybe, as with this valve state, a tube in the preamp. For our video, it doesn't matter if the preamp section is tube-based or transistor-based, we only focus on the power amp section. If you have a transistor power amp, you technically don't need to connect a cap. You can safely use it, you can power it on without a cap, and for instance use the line out or the send if your amp has one. However, I suggest doing it nonetheless. If you connect a speaker cap or a load box, you don't have to match the resistance. Here it says 4 ohms, so you can connect a 4 ohm cabinet, but you can also go higher. You can connect, for instance, an 8 ohm cabinet or a 16 ohm cabinet or load box. Whereas with tube amps, you have to match it. With solid state amps, you can go higher, but you can only go higher. So for instance, a 2 ohm cabinet will most probably fry your amplifier. And that's my kind of tutorial on how to connect an amp to a cabinet or to your PC. I hope you learned something new. or you weren't bored. That's all I can wish for. Anyways, let me know down in the comments what other tutorials do you want to see from me. Just leave a comment. And if you want to support this channel, check out the links in the description. Well, and with this said, thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe. May the force be with you and have a nice day.